Hey, thanks for watching my video. Today we are going to install integrated brake lights and turn signals onto the back of a 600RR. So first off, we need to remove the bolts that hold on the rear section. This one has a tab busted off. If you come across any broken off tabs, do yourself a favor and just take the time and replace the tab. There's only 4 screws holding this tail section on, and this tail section gets a lot of abuse in the bumps and bouncing around that it does on the back of your bike. So it really needs at least the 4 screws, 2 on each side, holding this thing onto the back of the bike. So if you have a broke off tab, repair it. I did mine with I just took a steel spacer and drilled some holes and safety wired it to the plastic, and then JB welded over it, and now it's as good as new. So anyway, we're going to pull off our tail section. It just pry it apart, slide it back, and then let's disconnect our wires. It's left and right turn signal and the tail light. So the clip just goes up and then it pulls apart. So there's a little clip up and pull apart. So now that we got it apart on our workbench, we're going to need an 8mm socket, and there's 4 nuts that are on this thing that need to be removed. There's 2 on the tail light, and then there's 2 on each side by what would be the turn signals. The turn signals that the last owner of this bike put on, absolutely useless. No one in their right mind can see the turn signals that were on the bike. So once you get the side nuts loosened, you can separate it off far enough to get the original tail light out. The previous owner also decided that some kind of spray-on brown tint was a good idea to spray on the tail light. It's really ugly. It looks like crap. So we're removing it. So the new one is a Crater. They're like $25 on eBay. It's integrated, turn signals, brake light, all in one. It's an exact matchup of the OEM. It fits right in there just perfectly. So also I'm going to add turn signals. You know, it's your ride. If you don't want turn signals, integrated brake light and turn signals, good for you. But my thought is you're only on this earth once, so you might as well try to keep yourself alive. The more warnings you give that jackass behind you that you're going to make a turn, the better. I do have a friend who was killed on a motorcycle because the guy behind him decided it wasn't important to stop. So anyway, so I'm going to have 2 turn signals on the back of this bike for each side. You do what you want. Right now I'm taking off these flush mount LED turn signals that some genius decided was a good idea. If you're putting flush mount turn signals on a motorcycle and the light is shining perpendicular to the bike, probably not a good idea, because who's going to see it when you're making a left or right turn? Nobody. Again, it's your life. You decide. So I like these turn signals. These are just cheap Chinese made. It has a blue light in the back of it, which is kind of cool, a blue running light, and then the LED turn signal's really bright. So I've put these turn signals on just about every bike that I've built in the last maybe 4 years. So that's probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 motorcycles I've built in the last few years. I try to do at least a bike a year. This year I'm actually up to, this is my 3rd bike, and I have a GSXR 1100 that I'm going to do next. But anyway, these turn signals are pretty cool. they slide in the existing hole perfectly, and then it has a 14 millimeter nut that you just tighten down. Make sure to keep that wire cover, that plastic cover that's on the wire, make sure to keep that on your turn signal, and make sure that that tubing is shoved up into the hole of the turn signal, because you want as little dirt and debris in there. I actually go a little bit further, and I don't show you in the video, but I did take a piece of safety wire up at the base, the stock of the turn signal. I put a piece of safety wire around there just to make that plastic tubing snug on the wire inside, so it didn't slip and slide off or out of the stock of the turn signal. It not only keeps dirt and debris out of the turn signal, but it keeps your wires protected from rubbing on anything and breaking the wire. So I've jumped over to the other side, again 8 millimeter, remove the little nut that's there, and then pop that useless turn signal off the side of the bike. If you have OEM turn signals, LED's the way to go. These little LEDs, those OEM turn signals are very heavy first off. So with the LEDs you're reducing some weight, and then the LEDs are usually much brighter than the OEM. So I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself right here. Forgot to put the 14 millimeter nut over the wires. And I typically leave the little connectors on the end of the wires until I get all my wires in place, and then I start cutting stuff up. I like to assemble all my electronics first, and then once everything's positioned and looking okay, then I start cutting up wires. In case I don't like the way these turn signals might have looked, or the way something looks on the bike, I can always take it off and maybe reuse the part on a different application. So again, I've tightened down my turn signal, and now I'm going to take my 14 millimeter wrench and finish tightening up. There's really very little room to work on these CBRs. I think they could have given us, you know, a little bit more room to play with the wires. So you're never going to get the turn signals lined up properly on the workbench. So, you know, get them close, but plan on doing some adjustments once you get this mounted up to the rear of the bike. So I'm running my wires through the little bracket, and I'm going to put my nut back on the little screws that hold that bracket to the side. This bracket here is probably the most important piece on the back, other than having those 4 screws holding the tail section to the back of the bike. That little bit of metal there is what holds everything together and keeps it kind of upright. So this here, what I'm showing you, when you have LED lights, when you change out LEDs, you need to replace the flasher. So this is an LED flasher relay. This one isn't going to work on the CBR 600RR, but I pulled it out and I just thought I would show it to you. If I figure out a way to slow down the turn signals on the CBR, I will do another video and show you how to do that. So here, there was rubber tubing over the new Taillight from Crater, and what I've done was took that rubber tubing off, and I'm putting a piece of 3/8 heat shrink over all the wires. So 2 of the wires were left dangling in the wind. The blue and the yellow, which are your turn signals, they were just, you know, loose, and I don't like having any wires loose, especially in the back of this bike. there's so much heat generated from having the exhaust up underneath the seat. I don't want to take the chance of any of my wires melting. So I'm going to go ahead and put heat shrink on everything, and as we go through this video, you're going to see me use a lot of heat shrink to protect these wires. When the last owner did his shenanigans on the lighting on the back of this bike, he didn't even route the wires properly, so the tail section looked like it was about a ½ inch off to the left because he routed the wires underneath the tail section and then up. So it looked really bad with the extended swing arm and then a crooked tail section. It was pretty hideous when I bought the bike. So I routed my new wires through the bracket, and there's a place to run those wires through, and there's also a little notch on the back of the taillight that's going to fit in there. Another thing I had to do, there was not a tag holder on this bike, so I had to fabricate a tag holder, which was pretty easy to do. And I have a picture of that at the end of the video. But once we get the wires through and get everything lined up, we can put our nuts on to hold this in place while we start splicing wires together. This tailpiece is pretty difficult to work with the nuts loose on it. So it's a good idea at this point. Just tighten everything down. It makes it a little bit sturdier for you when you're working on it. So now I'm going to start cutting wires. I'm doing the left side first. I've done a couple of these integrated taillights, and yours will probably be the same as mine. Blue is the left side, yellow is the right side. So I'm attaching the blue for the left turn signal and the red for the left turn signal, the outer turn signal. So what I'm going to do is I'm cutting them the same length, and then I'm going to strip the insulation off the wires, and I'm going to splice them together. This way my outer turn signal and my integrated turn signal will both flash together, giving ample warning to the jackass who's tailgating me. So I use these uninsulated barrel connectors. I find that these work really well for almost every application where I'm splicing a wire together. I don't really care for the ones that have the blue or the red plastic coating on them. I find that it makes the wire and the wire harness too bulky when you're done. What I do is I use the bare barrel connector, and then I put a piece of heat shrink over the top of it to insulate it, and it takes up a lot less room. Some places on a bike, it just doesn't even look right if you have those ginormous blue or red barrel connectors splicing your wires together. And when I'm building the bike, I like everything to look clean and organized. So now I've got my right side and my left side turn signals together. I'm doing my ground now. I'm going to do all three ground to the same barrel connector, because pretty much ground is ground no matter what when you're working on a bike, the common ground, either, and it's usually black wires or green wires on the bike are your ground. Completely opposite from your house. Don't go grabbing your black wire in your house and thinking that's a ground, because it's going to put you on your butt, and your arm's going to tingle for a little bit. So be careful with that black wire in your house. But on your bike and your car, usually a black wire or a green wire is a ground. So again, I've got all three grounds from the back together, and I'm going to crimp on a barrel connector. So that's good to go there. We've got a couple more wires left. White, your white wire is your tail light. So I want to put the blue wires from the turn signals and the white wire together. This way, when your tail light comes on, I showed you earlier in the video where the blue light on the back of the turn signals comes on. So these will all come on. The other thing you can use your white wire for is if you want to add a bunch of farkles to your bike. At this point, or when you're splicing together inside the bike, grab that white wire and use a relay. So when you turn your key on, your tail light comes on, it turns that relay on, and then things like heated grips or a radar detector, a phone charger, any appliance you want to add to your bike will then come on. And when you turn the key off, they go off, and you know they're off, and you don't have to worry about coming out and having your battery dead because you left your heated grips on. So here's the red wire. Obviously, the red wire is for your brake. When you hit the brakes, the red wire is going to light up the brake light. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut the red wire and strip it off and get it ready for connecting. This really is it's a tedious job, but it's very easy. So I want to use my OEM connectors. It's going to make life a lot easier in the future if you use your OEM connectors. And if ever you have to replace the tail light, if you get the same tail light, the wires are going to be the same, so you can just splice them within the tail section instead of going through all this like I've done tonight. So again, I'm going to take a piece of heat shrink. I cut off the old stuff. The old stuff was just, it was looking terrible. It wasn't really heat shrink. It was just a plastic wrap that Honda put on the wire back in 2006. You know, a few years later, that stuff gets a little bit brittle. It doesn't look as pretty. So I'm going to use a new piece of heat shrink. When I'm done, it'll be clean and tidy and tucked away, and nobody will ever see this but you watching the video and me, and maybe the next owner of this bike. It's a great idea if you're using heat shrink. Go out and get yourself a good heat gun. Don't sit there with a lighter and try to make the heat shrink work with the lighter. It's just a waste of time. So I do heat shrink in a couple pieces. It makes it easier and faster to thread the wires through. This one I'll heat up later when I'm done splicing everything together. And I'll cut a small piece of heat shrink. So the first thing we're going to do is our brake light, red. And if your CBR is like my CBR, and Honda does try to keep their wiring diagrams about the same, the black with the yellow stripe wire will be your brake light. The black with the white stripe will be your tail light. So see how we put that heat shrink on there? And once we melt it down, it takes up so much less space than one of those plastic barrel connectors that you'd buy at Walmart. So here's our black with the white, and this is going to go to our white with our blue wires for the outside, the external turn signals, and again with another piece of heat shrink. So there's my white with two blues, and we're going to splice this in. So we're going to do our grounds last, because I'm going to put the grounds from the turn signals in with the grounds that I've already spliced together. So we'll have 3 grounds going to 3 grounds. So like I said, we're going to do that last. So on your turn signals, your turn signals are going to be blue and green for one side, and it's going to be orange and green for the other side. And like I told you earlier, black and green, solid black or solid green on automotive applications typically are your ground. Now if it's green with the yellow stripe or green with the red stripe, that's another story. I'm not going to get into that with you, but usually a solid green or a solid black is some kind of ground. So again, I'm going to cut another piece of heat shrink to length. Just to make the OEM wires look pretty again. When the next owner takes this bike apart, my thought is I hope that they appreciate the extra time that I put into putting this bike together so it'll last a long, long time. Chances are the first thing they'll do is take off all the turn signals and put an extended swing arm back onto this bike. I would just have to laugh if I saw that. Ha. So I'm going to grab me another piece of heat shrink so I can splice my wires together. So we're going to put the green one on this one. This is going with the yellow. And then do our heat shrink. So we're going to do another piece of heat shrink. This is going to be the left side, and it's going to be orange and green, and that orange is going to hook up to the blue. Gator colors, go Gators. another piece of heat shrink to get me to the end. Alright, so we're good to go. So now we're going to take our orange and find our blue. There's our blue with the red. So we know that's the left side. I cut it a little bit too long. You'll do the same thing. If I were really good, I would have cleaned up my workbench before I shot this video. That way you didn't have to look at all the crap that I pulled off the bike already and I'm getting rid of. So we'll crimp the orange to the blue. And now we're at a point where we can put all of our blacks together, our black and greens, our grounds. So we just take all three of them, twist them together, get us another piece of heat shrink, protect those. Dang tools. So there we go. We got our heat shrink on. This will be the hardest crimp that you'll make, the 3 wires. 3 wires into these tiny barrel connectors that I use sometimes is pretty awkward. But again, I love these barrel connectors. You can get them on eBay. A package of 100 is maybe $4 shipped to your house. Much cheaper than those plastic junky things that you get from the auto parts store, from Walmart. Alright, so we have our wiring harness done now. So I have one more wire I need to shrink down. This is for the tail light. So I'm going to move that as close as I can and shrink down the wrap. So with all my heat shrink in place and all my wires connected, I want to make sure that these don't get pulled apart at any time. So I'm going to put a zip tie on the ends of the 3 OEM wires. Alright, now I'm going to take some electrical tape. I use a 3M brand, Minnesota Mining and Materials. So I'm going to take some 3M electrical tape and I'm just going to wrap it around all my loose wires, and that's going to make this look pretty enough anyway. But it's going to protect these wires from anything, any harm that might come to this bike. And a step further for doing it like this with the electrical tape, if while this bike's in my possession, if I have to tear this bike apart and do any wiring on this tail section, I know that all I have to do is remove this electrical tape, and I can get to all of my crimps and replace anything that any wires that might be bad. So after my electrical tape is done, I'm going to take some 3/4 inch heat shrink and I'm going to pull it down over the electrical tape, because God forbid I do not want anybody to look at my bike and see that I have electrical tape up underneath there. I've been places with motorcycles where guys are on their hands and knees looking up at under at things on a motorcycle, and I have no clue what the hell they're doing. But if they do that on this one, all they're going to see is clean wiring. And this is what your wiring harness should look like when you're done. So now we're going to mount it up to the back of the bike and try it out. So you're just going to plug orange to orange, white to white, blue to blue. Easy as that. So now once it's on, you see your right turn signal is working. I think it looks pretty cool, personally. Got your left turn signal working. Brake light. And I did replace the foot pegs on both sides and my pedals and everything, because this bike's been down and tumbled around. So make sure all your brake lights work. There's your blue light. That looks pretty cool. And then this is what the tail section looks complete. So I like it myself. And you can kind of see the tag. The tag's tucked up underneath there pretty well. And yes, the bike is going to be this color red when I'm done. This is the $249 kit from eBay. Thanks for watching my video. I hope you learned something. Watch some of my other ones.